Hey, welcome back to Rebel Movement Podcast. My name is Billy. My pronouns are they, them, she, her, and I'm really glad you're here. I'm back with my Britney Spears-esque 90s, 2000s Britney Spears-esque headphones to record a podcast all about flexibility. And I want to answer the question, can you increase your flexibility with yoga? Which, I mean, you would think is a short answer because yes, but it also kind of brings up a bunch of other stuff. So stay tuned for that. It won't be too long, but hopefully it will give you some answers and some insight into the differences between flexibility and mobility, why they're both important, benefits to each, and I don't know, just help you kind of make more informed decisions or whatever. Before we get there, I just want to do a little update. I don't have now that I've said that, I don't have tons and tons of updates really to give you. If you live in the Prince Edward County area, I am working on in-person classes. However, the ones I had originally scheduled are no longer happening, just for circumstances out of my control and the space's control. I do have space on my books for a couple of private clients. Probably, I don't know. I could probably do 3 or 4. I currently have a handful or so of private clients, so I might have space for more in the long run. I just want to kind of cap it at about 10 people so that I can get used to having that many people and making sure that I have the space and have everyone settled in before I were to add more people in. Does that make sense? Like, make sure I have those clients really okay, real quick. Let's try to explain this a little bit better. When we first start working together one-on-one, it takes like a little bit of time to find our groove. Not that it won't be great and helpful at the very beginning, but sometimes it just takes a little bit. Maybe we have our first session and we have, stuff to work on, and then the next session we're like, actually this isn't working this way. Let's readjust. Sometimes it takes a little bit, like a session or two, for us to get to know each other, so that you feel more comfortable, I feel more comfortable, we both have a bit more of a kind of like a foundation down. So it's like good at the very beginning. It's still good at the very beginning, but sometimes it just takes a little bit to like get into the groove. So I like to capping it at about 3 or 4 more people so that I can have the space to like get into the groove with all of those people before I were to onboard or like bring in anybody else one-on-one. So you can still send me a message, and if my books are full, I can add you to the wait list and you can be my first person that I contact when I am opening up again. And otherwise, there are a bunch of classes every single week. If you are wanting a group class online, I teach yoga classes. There's queer yoga now. There's yoga for anxiety now. Both of those are a drop-in, pay what you can basis. And then all of the other classes are part of the Rebel Movement Club, which is an online group membership, all anti-diet, queer safe, trauma-informed classes. Or there's the on-demand, which is only $20 Canadian a month, and you get as many of the recorded classes on my on-demand platform as you want to possibly take. So not really updates, I guess, just little plugs. My own commercial, which, I mean, if I'm doing my own commercial, I should work on the fluidity of that. But you're getting it real time. Before, I didn't plan that part. I planned the rest of the episode, didn't plan that part. Okay, so let's get into it. First, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between flexibility and mobility. And I'm really good at explaining this when you can see me. We'll see how this goes if you can't see me. I hope it'll make sense. You can always send me a message if you have any questions. So flexibility and mobility are different. Flexibility or mobility is the do you know what range of motion means? If a joint has, so each of your joints has a range of motion. There's like a range of motion that your joint has the ability to use, and then range of motion for your individual body has. So, for example, like shoulders, you can probably guess and visualize this, right? Like shoulders, you can reach your arms forwards, backwards to a degree, and up overhead, out to the sides. They're what's called a ball and socket joint. So there's a lot of mobility compared to, say, your knee, where it's just a hinge joint. It's not gonna, do all the I was gonna say flailing around, but like not all the like moving around that a shoulder joint would do. So let's use a knee joint, for example, because it's a little bit more limited. Knee joint has the capability of bending past 90 degrees to, let's say, to like where your upper thigh and your lower leg are basically touching, right? Like your knee joint has the capability of doing a very deep bend. However, your individual knee or knees might have a range of motion of, say, let's just say 90 degrees. Because, or maybe one of your knees has a range of motion of like 45 degrees or something like that, because maybe you had knee surgery. Things like injuries, surgeries, how you just normally function in your body, what you do day to day, will all affect your mobility in each joint. So when we're talking about mobility, we're talking about active or mobility classes. So say, for example, as a part of the Rebel Movement Club, mobility classes work on your active range of motion and increasing your active range of motion. So if, for example, that knee that you have 45-degree angle mobility in, the knee you have 45 degrees of range of motion right now, you can do mobility work or active range of motion drills or exercises in order to increase your mobility. So maybe, you start this stuff tomorrow, and then, 6 months, a year, 2 years from now, it depends on the person, maybe then you've built up towards 90 degrees or more than that. It's not something that's like you lose it forever. It is something sometimes where you might lose some mobility temporarily, but it's not always forever. There are exceptions to everything. This is not going into, we don't have like the time to go into all of the possible versions of this story, right? It depends on if you have health conditions, if you have had a joint replacement, all of those things will, like arthritis, all those things might affect long-term joint functioning. But so right now we're speaking about in general. So let's hopefully that'll make sense. You can always rewind and do this again or ask me as many questions as you want. Okay, so active range of motion is, we've talked about what it looks like in the joint, right? It's where you can move your joint, how you can bend your knee, for example, how you can move your arm actively. So it's not like you are picking up your foot, like in dancer's pose, when you reach behind you or reach to your side, you hold your foot and then maybe you bring your foot towards your glutes. That would be a passive stretch. You have the support of your hand pulling your knee towards, or pulling your foot towards you. Or if you were to hold your one arm with the opposite hand and lift your arm overhead, you have the support. Or using a strap, for example, you're using a strap around your foot and pulling your foot towards your glutes behind you. Those are passive range of motion. It also would apply for passive stretches that also would apply for things like gravity. So a forward fold, if you're standing and there's gravity in there and you're just sort of letting it be passive, it's more of a passive stretch. You can add in active stuff, but again, that's going into more nuances that we probably don't have time for, and also it might be a little bit more confusing. So passive stretches are like, forward fold with gravity. It's something like a child's pose. It's tends to be more restorative. Things that have support, and trying to think of an example where you could do both. Well, I guess you could do The dancers, but that's not quite as familiar. Okay, so do you know the version of thread the needle where you're laying on your back? You have your knees bent, feet on the floor. One ankle goes to the opposite knee. So your ankle bone is about like halfway ish on the opposite knee. Foot's flexed. Can you picture it like a figure four with your legs? If you're to lift your legs, so bring your knees towards your chest without using your arms or a strap, that would be a more active range of motion or active stretch. If you're using a strap or your hands and you're pulling your knee towards your chest, that would then be passive. So, all of this to say, flexibility is more it's more tied to your the passive stretches. Mobility is more of the active range of motion things. So yes, yoga will make you more flexible. However, it's usually best with the active range of motion side of things too, which yoga does include as well. Let me see if I can find an example. Just give me 1 second. Okay, I found a short definition from the Peloton website. I don't usually go on the Peloton website. It's just the first one that popped up and they worded it well. So in case you missed all the sort of technical explanation I just gave, this is their explanation. Mobility refers to the body's ability to move through its full range of motion. Flexibility is the ability to stretch. When you're talking about something like warrior pose, any of the warrior poses, there is still active range of motion things happening. Yoga doesn't, by default, always include active range of motion. However, it can and does sometimes. So if you're asking the question, does yoga improve flexibility? Yes, for sure. That's in there. It's part of the passive stretching. However, often people are looking for flexibility because maybe you're thinking like, I want to be able to touch my toes, or I'm wanting to feel better in my body or reduce injury. There's many, many different reasons to seek flexibility. Depending on your reason for seeking flexibility, it will kind of change the more, we'll say, optimal approach to your practice. So if you're seeking flexibility because you want to touch your toes, it's probably going to take less time to get there, and you will ultimately eventually potentially get there by doing a combination of flexibility and mobility. And if you're seeking to reduce injury, that'll more likely happen from more mobility and strengthening work. If you are wanting to feel better in your body, that's a totally individual thing, and it is probably just whatever feels best for you. So maybe for you, it's lots of yoga, like passive yoga stretches. Awesome. And by no means trying to say that there is no merit to passive stretching and flexibility. They're still great things. They're great things for many reasons, some of them including they're really helpful for your nervous system. If you are a person who is all the time or most of the time or very often very stressed out, restorative yoga can be so helpful for helping reduce stress, helps to trigger parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest. It helps to improve flexibility, which might help your body feel a little bit better, might help you have a little bit less stiffness. It helps just in general with some of how your body functions. If you are a person who's, you know what? I'm just going to say here, just in case this is your very first time listening to this podcast, I am all about going with an approach that is very individual. So you might have a 1 minute practice, and that's fine. That counts. I'm very kind of as a counterculture. Like the way that I approach things, business, teaching, movement is very the opposite of the mainstream. And by that, I mean, I'm never going to give you a list of shoulds in your practice. I might, if you're coming to me, for example, say you want to work with me one-on-one, and rather than doing the anti-diet coaching, say you have chronic back pain and you're wanting to reduce that and feel a little bit better. In that case, I'm not going to tell you what you should do, but I might help you look at what's happening in your day-to-day life. I might give you some mobility things, some stretches that will help, and they're kind of more like a could, not like a should. So I know this is such a simple question, but it's such a complicated answer. The short answer is yes, flexibility is improved by yoga. However, flexibility is not what, like, when some people think of flexibility, they think of mobility as well. Let me give you a scenario. So let's use the knee example from before. So as I said, knee is hinge joint, so you can like have your leg straight and then kick your foot or kick your heel in towards your glutes. Say, for example, you injured your knee when you were like 3 years ago. Maybe you're jumping around, slipped on the ice, and you hurt yourself. And then, is that a best example? Anyway, we'll keep it. I'll keep it. I'll go with it. Hurt your knee. And ever since then, it's been, you know what? We're going to make that less time. Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. No, we'll use that. And I'm going to use more than one example. I'm trying to find a way, like one example that will answer all of, like, give a bunch of information, but I'm just going to do two. So say, for example, you're, like I said, jumping around, slipped on the ice, hurt your knee like 3 years ago, and it's felt weird ever since. And now you have back pain on your opposite side. The opposite leg hurts. Maybe your shoulder hurts. Those are things that happen. Maybe they're a small bit of pain. Maybe they're a little bit like a lot of pain. Maybe they flare up sometimes when it's a little bit rainy. And say you're coming to work with me because of the back pain. This is not always the case, but often everything in your body is connected. Like, speaking of like joints, muscles, bones, obviously it's all connected, right? When something happens in one part of your body, it can often kind of ripple out and affect other parts. So when you hurt your knee, maybe your body compensated and was favoring your other leg. Maybe there was like a muscle you pulled, so you were walking slightly differently and engaging different muscles, and then it just never really healed properly, so you just kept using those muscles, and then those muscles got tired, and that's where you're feeling the pain. There's so many scenarios, honestly. I can't simplify it ever. It's just always this kind of complicated story, because everyone's complicated. We're complicated human beings with complicated bodies and complicated histories. But so say you're coming to me with that back pain, and we do stretches and we do some mobility, say for back. But it might not ever go away if we are only ever doing, say, passive stretches for your back. Because in this scenario, the pain isn't the origin story. The origin of it is not from back. It's from your knee or your hip. You know what I mean? Like it's from somewhere else. And you kind of have to, in that case, it would be more helpful to do stretching for sure, and also do some some active mobility work for knees and hips and also back. So you're kind of helping your body to kind of helping your knee to do knee things again and helping your hips to do hip things again, rather than your body borrowing movement ability from your hip or your opposite knee to help with the injury. Now, the other scenario I was going to say is I'll use a personal example. So I used to be a barista, and which is like making coffee, if you don't know what that means. Which maybe you do. I feel like it's a pretty common word now, but there's some people out there who don't know what it is. So I used to make fancy coffee. And if you don't know how to do that, you have to the espresso grinds, you have to tamp the espresso, which you just use this little stamp looking thing and push down on the espresso to make it into a puck. And your arm, at least with the height of the counter I had your elbow has to be up in the air with your knee elbow up in the air, arm bent at about 90 degrees, and you push down. Now, I was a barista for, I don't know, 8 years. Pretty good at making fancy coffee. I can make a swan, a bear, latte art. I'm out of practice now, but that's not really a motion, doing that tamping. That is a, like, I don't say it's not necessarily like a natural movement, especially when it's loaded. It's not really a movement that is, let's just say at the height the counter was at, from where I was working for quite a few years, it wasn't a movement that was great in my body, didn't feel good in my body, and over time it caused injury. I had limited range of motion in my shoulder. And this was before I was teaching, I would do a bunch of stretches and it would get worse. And I would do a bunch of stretches and it wouldn't, nothing, it didn't make a difference. So in this scenario, my shoulder was injured because I was constantly overusing a certain small little muscle group, and which is to do a movement that it wasn't really supposed to do. Maybe I was doing it improperly. I don't know. So that was the reason that the tension was there, that the pain was there. It was a signal. It was like my brain seeing, oh, hey, there's an injury here. We're going to kind of like add bubble wrap, and we're going to like protect this. We're going to protect this spot so that nothing makes it worse, so it doesn't get worse. And then I would come along and stretch, which is like I came along and like popped all the bubble wrap. You know what I mean? I got rid of all the bubble wrap. And then my body would go, oh, no, that signal didn't work last time. That I didn't put enough bubble wrap on. Next time I'll add more. So then it gets more tense. And then on and on and on. Because it's not addressing the root of the issue. One of them is that I needed to stop doing that, which I did. That's not why I stopped, but, whatever. Maybe it would be I need to adjust how I'm tamping if I couldn't leave that job. But how it worked in my story is that it left that job. Next thing that I had to do was do mobility. So starting to address, there's that one movement was really, used a lot. So that one action, my shoulder was really strong at doing. But there was other movements that were not as strong. So next thing would be to balance out how my shoulder was functioning and then work on mobility, which has meant that long term, the tension is not there. It doesn't hurt as much. Sometimes it hurts occasionally, but it doesn't really hurt ever anymore. Thank goodness. I don't have full range of motion in my shoulder quite yet, but it is improved a lot, like a ton. And, and still working on it. I'm not working on it as, actively as I was before. I also did get like massages and, a couple of times. Honestly, I hated it. It was great. Like I didn't hate, like it was so helpful and I was really privileged to be able to afford to do it, but it hurts so much. So hopefully those examples help. It depends on the reason why you're seeking flexibility. If you're seeking flexibility because you have injuries, then yes, for sure, yoga's great and it's helpful. You may also want to do some mobility work. And the other thing I will say about that is that you want to find a mobility work that someone who teaches mobility work that is doing it in a way that is still trauma informed and anti-diet and giving you many options. There's so many people who teach mobility out there who just give you like the movement that would be the one you do if you had the most range of motion ever. You're like, how the heck am I ever going to do this? So if you are listening to this podcast and you just searched mobility on Instagram and you're like, what the fuck? I can't do that. That's not what I mean. That stuff is not what I mean. You can always check on my on demand if you're wanting to know or join one of the classes, but I don't want to scare you because I do not mean all those fancy things that you may have just found when you Googled it. So I think the last part of this is the part of it, like it does flip at flexibility. Having more flexibility decrease your chances of injury. And like kind of to some degree, yes, I think. There's always new studies coming out. So my knowledge, what I have been taught, it does a bit, yes. However, if you really want to reduce your chance of injury, mobility is the way to go. So if you go back to that knee example, so you know that your knee has the ability to bend your heel towards your glutes, even if you can't do that right now. And then what you can do right now, for example, is 45-degree bend. Injuries will often, not always, but often happen between those two. Between your active range of motion and the motion that is possible in that joint. So the more you can do mobility, which will increase the range of motion, the less likely you are to be injured in that gray area. And so in conclusion, yes, yoga does increase flexibility. Active range of motion is going to be helpful for reducing injury. It will also increase your mobility, which will have more of an impact on reducing injury, feel better in your body long term. Flexibility is also it will be increased with yoga for sure. And it will help your body, generally will help you feel better too. Reduce stress, sometimes it can help you sleep. It can feel really good, and it can be really relaxing. Yoga will sometimes, can't say for sure because I don't know what kind of yoga you're taking. So it depends. Sometimes yoga will also include active range of motion stuff. Range of motion is what a joint can do. Active range of motion is if you were to bend your knee, keeping your thighs in line, bend your heel towards your glutes. How much can you bend? How much can you pull your heel towards your glutes without any assistance or without gravity? Passive range of motion or passive stretching, would be you grab your foot behind you and you pull your heel towards your glutes. And then I think that's all the things. The other thing, I don't know if I want to say this because I don't want it to sound like I'm saying not to do yoga, because I'm a yoga teacher and I do yoga all the time. And I think that it has lots and lots of benefits. And that's, if you are trying to reduce injury or you feel like you're prone to injury, you have limited range of motion, limited active range of motion, doing a pose, like a stretch, like a yin class where you hold a passive stretch for a long time, is again going to be so relaxing. It's going to be great for your nervous system. It's going to help you probably sleep better. It's going to help you feel better. You'll be more focused on your breath, more mindful. Lots of benefits. But it's not the thing that's going to help you increase the flexibility or increase mobility and like increase your ability to touch your toes or reduce injury. That's going to come from more active practices. So I know this is so complicated. If you have questions about your particular situation, feel free to send them in and I can make a part 2 giving answers to questions. So if you're like, okay, this is my experience, I've hurt my knee and this is what happens when I practice this, and like what if you want to talk through it that way, send those in. You can send them in here or info@movewithbilly.com, and we can either chat one-on-one, or I can answer the question on the podcast so that other people who are experiencing similar things can also get the answer. If you have questions about any content on this episode, some of it doesn't make sense. If you're like, wait, can you explain this again? Can you talk about what that looks like? Go for it. Also, check out or send me an email, or check out my Instagram, because I do talk about, not as much the last couple of weeks, but I do talk about mobility and flexibility, and I do mobility movements. I do movements every Monday on my Instagram, and some of those are mobility things. If you're curious about that, you can also join the club and take mobility classes with me. There's one Monday and Thursday at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. There is also some mobility on my website, including a chair mobility class if you want to do the on-demand. And thanks for listening. This was kind of a different, I don't know if it's a different style than normal, different approach. And despite all my prep, I hope that I covered everything. It feels like it's such a broad topic, and there's so many like yes ands. There's like so many I don't know if caveat is the right word, or nuances. There's so many bits to this that you can't really encompass in this episode. So it's the basic short answer is it depends. Which, when I was taking teacher training, I had a couple teachers who say that all the time, and it really annoyed me. But I understand it. Like, I understood it, but I was like, oh, I wish it was simpler. So if you're feeling that, I get it. It is frustrating. I wish there was a simple answer. If you would like a more specific answer to your situation, like I said, send me an email, send me a message, and thanks for listening. I hope you have a great day. Make sure you follow this podcast, rate, review, subscribe, download, do all those things. They help me so much as a podcast. It'd mean a lot to me if you just took 5 seconds right now. Leave me a review on whatever you're listening to. Don't even have to write things. Just put a star or 5 stars. I mean, whatever you think. And I will talk to you next week. Bye.